Hey, Phillip.
Hello, Kent. What's going
All
on?
right. Every company deals with turnover.
Oh, my
Uh,
word.
I would, I
Don't even
would think
say it.
that.
Don't even say it. It's the bane of my existence.
All right. Well, that's a great place to start. Tell me about where your banes are coming from.
I will tell you that turnover, I can easily say turnover was the most disruptive thing that I found my experience in building and maintaining continuity in business.
Okay.
Extremely disruptive because unfortunately people don't give you advance notice. Hey, in a couple months, I'm going to be leaving for a new job. They generally tell you if it's good, they give you 2 weeks. Many
Right.
cases, it's like I'm out of here this afternoon, and you have no control
Oh.
over that.
Okay.
And so it can throw you in a tailspin, and that's something that I struggled with and that hurt me time and time again to the point that it almost affected my management style. In fact, I had a friend of mine, I've mentioned before, I kind of had a kitchen cabinet of people outside the business that I would talk to about the business from different perspectives. And this person told me, he goes, you are managing because you're afraid to lose people. And that's not good. And he was
Right.
correct because I had come through a time where been exceptionally high turnover, particularly in higher management type positions. And I was so afraid of losing employees because it was pain. It's like, it's going to be painful. And so you don't want it, you want to avoid the pain. And so I would work trying to avoid turnover. And many times that was not the best way to manage my team.
Do you have a percentage? Like, I think most years I lose about X percent of people.
No, I never did that. I think yeah, I was very naive. Particularly in the
Okay.
early days, I just assumed when I hired somebody, they were going to love me and they were gonna love the company and they were joining for life. That was I
That's
mean, I
this.
didn't really expect that, but yeah, I never expect them to leave. And
Of course.
and so it kind of hurt my feelings when somebody came in and said, "Hey, I got a job offer I can't refuse." And I'm like, "Oh, good for
Yes.
you, but I hate you." That's why I
Right.
wonder
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because it was good for the other company, but wasn't good for me, and so, uh,
Right.
I I never uh, particularly in the early days, I never planned for it, and so that's what made it
Okay.
so painful because I didn't plan on turnover, and so when it happened, I had to scramble, and it was painful for me, it was painful for the rest of the people in the office, and consequently, it's painful for our clients. And that was the big fear is that any disruption of my operation is gonna impact my ability to perform for my clients, and
Of
that
course.
was a huge fear. So, yeah, I was naive in that I didn't plan on it in the early days, and and I can't say that there was a regular schedule, "Okay, every year you're gonna lose X percent, you're gonna have this much turnover." It was it was more or less kind of market driven a little bit like, you would go through a period where, tech people were really scarce, and it
Okay.
was a employees market, and so people were out sending their resumes, "I'm just trying to get the highest pay I can get," and we were not in a position to be in a bidding war for those types of people, and so if it was that kind of environment, you had more turnover because people just found better opportunities. It was a fact of life I dealt with sometimes more times than not, than other times.
All right. So, how did you keep them? How did you try to keep your
So,
employees happy and stable percentage of the workforce?
yeah, so that's what I eventually came to realize that I'm never going to not have turnover. Every business has turnover. It's a fact of life. So instead of just saying, well, I'm just not going to have it, I've got to look at ways to mitigate the risk of the fallout from turnover. That's what I
Okay.
had to learn to manage. And
Okay.
it was a on the job training kind of thing, but here are just some things that I employed to try to help either reduce turnover or to mitigate the risk from it.
Okay.
One thing that was difficult to do in the early days when you had so few employees, but as we began to grow, the way we were structured, certain employees, certain techs, for instance, were responsible for certain clients. That was their sort of their book of business, if you will. And so it was their job to know everything about that client's network, passwords,
Of
everything.
course. Of course.
And so what I didn't want to happen was institutional knowledge that was important for our business to operate, to exist in only one place in the head of an employee.
Right.
Because if
Jane
that
knows everything.
yep,
Yeah.
and I realized that that's a power move by employees. I know more about this client than anybody else here, so you're never gonna fire me. I get that, but as the owner of the business and the owner of that client, I have the right to say, "You're not gonna be the only one that has that knowledge." And so having, number 1, and a way to document that knowledge in a system that is accessible by the entire company. If you will, we began to develop an internal knowledge base about our own operations and about our own clients. And so what we
Sure.
set up is a way that everything that you knew about that client had to be put into our knowledge base such that if you're out of commission, you're on vacation and I need to do something with this client, somebody else can pick it up and they don't have to call you. And so that was number one, getting that information in a centralized database, a central place that we could all access it. Number two, I began to develop overlapping responsibilities, meaning, okay, yeah, so your primary responsibility is client A, B, C, D. Then tech number two, your responsibility is clients E, F, G, H, but you're backup for A, B, C, D, E.
Okay.
Okay, and so
Sure.
we would do overlap so that there is some familiarity. If one person drops off, the other person, okay, I know a little bit. Most of our clients, they were similar enough that you can support one client, you can support the other one, but you've got to have some institutional knowledge about that particular client.
Also
So
works for vacations, works
sure.
for
It's
sickness, all
practical.
that.
It's very practical and
Yeah.
not just for turnover, but just a practical way to run the business so that you don't let you don't create silos in your business that all the information is just in this one place. You've got to scatter it around and make
Right.
sure it's accessible and make sure multiple people are comfortable with accessing it and acting on that. So that was number
Okay.
one. Number two, I mean, seems trite, but you try to keep employees happy to the best you can. Sometimes there somebody, a wife or a spouse gets transferred, and so they're bringing in the most money in the family, and so they have
Yeah.
to pick up and move. So you can't help that. So there are things that happen that it doesn't matter how good a workplace you have, there's going to be turnover for those types of things. But there was a fair amount of turnover. People got disgruntled with different things, whether it be
Right.
position or pay or benefits or what have you. And so I worked very hard to try to make sure that we 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 were a competitive compensation model that we were using, and we had tools that we could use for our particular area to know what different jobs and what competitive rates were. So we tried to be competitive. I really tried to introduce benefits that made sense, that we could afford, and that made a difference for our employees. Um, I also, and I'm a firm believer in this because I hate being pigeonholed into doing something, the same thing every day. I get bored very easily. And so an interesting workload and creating interest in your work rather than just doing just, assembly line, just
Right.
putting this part on, and making it interesting. And there are ways that we would go about doing that. And another thing we would do is I mentioned this, I think, in a previous episode, is offering continuing education. So if there was some new technology or some new product that an employee expressed interest in, and that knowing that would enhance our ability to meet the needs of our clients, then we would pay for them to go through a class on that. And so providing them for a pathway to advancement, to better themselves, to enhance their career, and even having a pathway within the company saying, okay, you're at Tech One today, but let me just show you, you stick with us and you meet these sorts of metrics, then you can promote here and here. And then there's a management path, and then there's a purely technical expertise path that you can go on. So we tried to create that within the company, so you just didn't feel like you were at a dead end job. So
Right.
that
Right.
was some of the things that we did trying to keep employees happy. Now, when it came to really strategic employees, and this was particularly later on in the business, and I had some people in strategic, we would call it C-suite type positions, and
Right.
you've invested a lot in them, and they're very important. You know, they're part of the strategic vision for the company, and so you want them to stay with you. And so, um, I've heard people call it golden handcuffs or whatever.
Sure.
You put some incentives out there that are tied to them staying with the company, and that could be anything from setting up a vesting schedule for your 401k so that the company is matching what you're putting back into your retirement plan, but putting it on a vesting schedule such that it roll, you know, you have to be there for a year or 2 or whatever it is before you get
Right.
that company match entirely. And so those sorts of things, bonuses tied to longevity, or even something we did again toward the end, we set up a profit sharing. And I'm not an expert in this. I hired somebody to set up a profit sharing plan for us. And what that meant is that a certain classification of employee, if they were a certain type of management, you could essentially uh, get compensated based on the profitability of the company, much like the owner would. But
Sure.
again, that was tied to some metrics of longevity with the company as well. So those are the
Okay.
types of things that we tried to put in place to entice particularly strategic people to stick with us for the long haul. And I would say those things work very well. But
Okay.
I think that the biggest headache I had was really uh, frontline people that were client facing, and they're here Friday and then they don't show up Monday and they've quit. So,
Mm.
because they were that's who the client saw every day. And so it was
Right.
very disruptive because the nature of our business is that it was relationship, it was technical, but it was also relationship based. So they wanted to see a familiar face. They wanted
Of
somebody
course.
that they knew them, knew their people, knew their network and that sort of thing. And so if someone is suddenly not there, they feel like, "Oh, I'm not being supported."
Right.
And
Right.
so what I tried to do anytime there was turnover, I tried to introduce a new person, a new face into that client and do it in a very warm and deliberate way. And I guess I had real experience with this because I I did that on myself. Because in the early days, I was the face of the company to most of our clients, almost all of our clients. And so when they would call and they had an issue, I was the one coming to fix the issue. Then as I began to hire techs, that was the purpose of hiring people. So because I couldn't do
Yeah.
everything, and so I would send Billy Bob out to client A, and client A calls me, "Whoa, why are you sending Billy Bob out here? We hired you." And so
Right.
there was a sense that I'm sending a surrogate, and that surrogate is not as good as me, which
Sure.
technically was probably correct back in the day, but I
Hmm.
didn't want to give that perception. So what I would do, Billy Bob comes on staff. He's going to start on Monday. He would go through a training, obviously, but once I'm ready to introduce him to the client, I would personally take Billy Bob. I'm using
Okay.
Billy Bob because I never had an employee named Billy Bob. So I'm using that. So it's not referring to anybody, but I would take Billy Bob to said client and the stakeholders, the people that were our main contacts at that firm, and I would say, "Hey, I want to introduce you to
Right.
Billy Bob." And I would build up Billy Bob to the hilt. Like, this guy, he is cream of the crop.
Right.
I'm like, "We're
Okay.
lucky to get him." Yeah, I would, and I'm not,
Right.
but
Right.
I
Right.
would really,
Yeah.
Billy Bob left that meeting probably thinking, "Well, you need to be paying me more." Because,
That's right.
but
Future
what
Hall of Famer.
exactly what I wanted to do was to plant in the client's mind, you know what, this relationship with Billy Bob may be better than what we had with Philip. And what I would say is, because of I'm growing and I've got so many duties, I cannot give you the full attention. Billy Bob is going to give you his full attention. And so
Right.
many times that went a long way to easing that transition. And so I continued that practice even if it wasn't me taking the person around, but when we had a new tech come in and took a place of someone, the manager or whatever of that group would then take
Sure.
them around and do very warm introductions. Now, I know some founders, experts, if you will, have ego problems with that. I never did because there are some people like, yeah, Billy Bob's not as good as me, and he never will be because I'm me and he's Billy Bob. But I
Oh,
will tell you, if I
right.
got a call from a client and they said, you know what, we love Billy Bob. We think we're being supported better than we ever have. And I was the immediate person, preceding
But
person supporting
before,
them. I jumped for joy because that meant, okay, I am succeeding at scaling this business. It doesn't just depend on me. And so I had no problem with Billy Bob stealing my limelight and stealing all
that's
the
right.
praise for the client. In fact, I love that. I absolutely
Right.
love that. So, doing easing the transition when there is a turnover, and it's not just with clients, but also in the office, particularly if you had um, a really good person that had a really good relationship with other people in the office, and they turn in their resignation. I had to start to work that minute to create a climate in the office, not doom and gloom, but you know what? This is growth. This is part of what we do, and we're going to our next phase. And so I would one mistake I made um, a few times is automatically, particularly if it was somebody in management, automatically pulling somebody over, that was in the group that was being managed and say,
Oh,
okay, you be acting manager. That's not always the best move. Now, if you have someone that's being groomed for that, but putting somebody in management that's not ready for it is not a recipe for
sure.
success. And so many times I, particularly when we're smaller, I would assume control over management of that team in the interim. And I would assure them, "Hey, nothing's changed. You're gonna report to me instead of to Billy Bob." Billy Bob just turned in his 2-week notice. And so during the transition, Billy Bob and I both are going to be at our weekly meetings, but you're going to report to me until such time that I have someone else in place. And many times it was an interview process we had to go through to get somebody to fulfill that. But again, it meant my workload increased. And
Right.
that's what was so painful about turnover is because I knew immediately, depending on the level of the person that was leaving, that my workload was gonna increase significantly, and that was painful for me, and I
Of
hated it,
course.
but I had to just kinda letting it be on autopilot was a recipe for disaster. I had to get in and jump in and mitigate.
Get your hands dirty,
Yep, absolutely.
as it were. So, how long, as a general rule, did it take to replace people?
Yeah,
I know it's all different, and time. Sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market.
yeah.
As a general rule.
Ideally, if someone turned in a 2-week notice, I wanted to have someone hired before they left. That was ideally.
Okay.
Didn't always happen,
Okay.
but I would put out either, ads or a recruiter, request or whatever the day I received
Oh,
the
okay.
letter. If it wasn't somebody internal that was gonna promote up.
Right.
And so, ideally, I would love to have them come in, even if they weren't employed, even if they hadn't started by that time, at least to come in and meet the outgoing person, if it was a friendly thing. If
Of
if if
course.
the person
Of
is totally
course.
disgruntled and they hate the company, I don't want them anywhere near my new recruit. But if
you
it
can
was
you can leave early. We'll give you your two
exactly.
weeks.
In fact, I have had people before that turned in a 2-week notice, and I said, "No, thank you. You
Oh,
can go ahead
really?
you can go ahead and leave." Yeah, they were a cancer.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were gonna
Okay.
do
All right.
nothing more than just be destructive for the
Right.
remaining 2 weeks. And
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
because they had no skin in the game anymore,
exactly.
and they're already a problem. That
Yep.
makes sense. So did you hire Nashville only, regional, send
No,
out ads
regional.
national?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
actually, toward the end, believe it or not, we've talked in the early days how when I first started, Nashville was sort of like hee haw Nashville kind of country music back.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't, but
Yeah.
that was perception. Um, on toward the middle and the end, Nashville was the it city, if you will. New York Times
Yep.
declared it the it city. We actually were getting recruits from other parts of the country because they wanted to move to Nashville.
Oh, okay.
Like, "Where'd you see our
That's
ad?" And they'll
great.
go, "Yeah, I live in Pennsylvania," or whatever. "Well, what's your connection? You
Yeah.
got family?" "No." "Well, why are you applying why are you wanting to interview for a job in Nashville?" "We wanna get out of here. We wanna move to Nashville. We want to raise our family in Nashville." So, Nashville became a magnet, later on, and we were able to we got really good employees from the Northeast, from all over. So, yeah.
Yeah.
In the early days,
That's
it was
great.
just, Middle Tennessee,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I guess the final thing that I tried to do to mitigate the risk was, um, in the early days, I didn't have any kind of employment contract. It was just like, "Hey, come to work. I'll give you a check," that sort of thing. But, I figured out, we need to formalize this. I actually had an attorney
Yeah.
to draft me a very simple employment contract. But one thing, and it's in most employment contracts, is a non-solicitation and a non-compete clause. What that means is that somebody that works for you for a period of time after they leave, they're not gonna try to recruit your employees to go work for them for the tech company across
Right.
town. And number 2, they're not gonna try to come back and recruit your clients, try to get your clients. And so, did I have people violate that? Yep, absolutely. So I ask, opinion, um, an attorney, is this going to stand up in court? And I got opinions all over the place. Sometimes yeah, sometimes no. It depends on this, depends on that. I never could get a clear cut determination if it would, if we could go to court. But even then, if we're gonna sue somebody, you're gonna spend a lot of court costs, and again, my techs were in a position where they were the front line to the client, so they knew the client. Many times, they had their personal cell phone of my tech and so forth, and so, all of a sudden, they up and quit, and the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from client X saying, "Hey, you know what? Billy Bob just called me."
Hmm.
They wanna know, "I thought he quit." I'm like, "He did." "Well, why is he calling me?" "Well, I know why Billy Bob's calling you. Billy Bob's trying to do his own
That's
gig
right.
over here."
Right. 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 Right.
And so what I tried to do was to scare Billy Bob to death. And so I got an
Okay.
attorney just to write me a letter that says, "Hey, you know what? You're in violation of your employment agreement." And we'd copy that in there, and it's coming from the attorney, not coming from me. And we order you to cease and desist, or else we are going to have to file a lawsuit and claim damages. That generally did the trick. That scared them off. I never had a situation where I had actually had to um, go to court.
Yeah.
Um, but, yeah, interesting. I did have one time, um, it's one of the few times I fired a client.
Okay. All
So,
right.
I had a tech that was working for me, and um, he was good. He was very charismatic. He was technically very good, but he was shady. And I discovered that late in his tenure and found he was doing some things and so I had to let him go. And what I found out after the fact, and we recovered some emails and so forth, he was telling this client, he was the tech responsible for this client, and he was doing the work and obviously entering time to bill back to the client. But he was saying, you know what? I'm not going to do this. This I will do this on my own time and bill you separately. I had emails about
Oh.
that. And the email
Oh.
from the client, who was an attorney, okay, yeah. So I confronted the attorney about it. I went to his office.
Right.
I said,
Right.
in our contract, we have a non-solicitation, uh,
Yeah.
where you cannot employ our employees outside of the realm of this contract. And he looked at me. He
Right.
goes, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "That's what you did." He goes, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "You know what? Use him. We're not going to support you anymore." I said, "That's it. I
Okay.
don't do business that way." That's one of the
Right.
few times to his face, I fired the client. I have no
Okay.
regrets.
Yeah. Of course
I
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Because
I
he
could
had no regrets.
yeah, I could have made a big issue about it and tried to,
Of course.
file a lawsuit, but, it was an attorney in our area, and I just didn't want the publicity that
Yeah.
a
Right.
tech company is firing is suing
Right.
a law firm, but I didn't wanna work
Right.
for him anymore, and I made it clear.
Yeah.
So we did not. But those are the things that we would do to try to mitigate, uh, the risk from turnover, and,
Okay.
um, and those helped. It definitely helped, but it's something that you're going to deal with, and you need a plan, to help you, deal with it, and like I said, to mitigate the risk.
That's great. I learned so much. Thank you so much. Oh, go
So,
ahead.
Kent, I'm gonna ask you that you never quit as my co-host on the Calling and the Climb podcast, because I would just freak out if that were to happen. So I've
Well,
got to
I
think of
haven't
some.
signed anything yet. I
You
haven't
have
signed
not, but
anything
I'm
yet.
looking for some golden handcuffs for you. So anyway, we'll see
That
how
sounds
goes.
great.
All
That
right.
sounds great.
See you
Thanks,
next time.
Philip.
Yeah.
You bet.